Second hour of Clay and Buck kicks off now, and we're joined by our friend Alex Berenson. Go check out Unreported Truths on Substack, which is where he does a lot of his great work. Also his various books, which I think particularly these days in retrospect, you'll see, wow, got a lot of important things right. Mr. Berenson, good to have you back on the show.
Good to talk to you, Buck. How are you?
I'm on the mend, my friend. A little touch of the norovirus, I think, a couple of days ago.
Every time I talk to you, you're sick.
Yeah, what can I tell you? I'm pulling long hours. I got a baby. There's a lot of things going on over here. It's pretty crazy. So tell me, speaking of sick, COVID vaccine for healthy children, healthy pregnant women removed from CDC immunization schedule. I had to kind of laugh because on the front page, so the CDC removes it from the schedule, and I think it was the New York Times on the front page today was, should they be removing this from the schedule? I'm like, I remember when the notion of the CDC should be questioned was a horrible crime against humanity. What do you think?
I'm actually frustrated, and I really want to write about this today on the stack, but I'm working on a story that's in some that I think is even more important. But I think I think that the FDA, the new guys in charge they're very serious. The CDC and also Robert Kennedy and Jay Bhattacharya, who's at NIH. I think it's a good new regime, and I think they want to do the right things. But I feel like in this case, they didn't go nearly far enough, right? I mean, this is what they should be worried about is whether the COVID vaccine works for anybody, and certainly whether it works for essentially any adult under 65. And so what did they do? Last week, the FDA said, well, we're going to require new trials that effectively are going to mean the vaccine is not going to be available for healthy adults under 65 because the companies are never going to run these new trials. Okay, that sounds like a big move, but then you see how they defined healthy, and at least 80% of the American population, maybe 75, maybe 80%, probably doesn't fit as healthy under the categories. So they didn't really do anything to reduce vaccine availability because none of those people, the people in the healthy category, were getting it anyway. And the CDC is more of the same. And, okay, so you want to say they took a small step, and it's a small step in the right direction? I agree with that. The problem is, look at the pushback that they've gotten today and that they got last week. The FDA got last week. The CDC is getting today. They do nothing, almost nothing. They take the smallest possible step, the most scientifically valid step. And you have these people screaming as if they're throwing babies off a bridge. They cannot win. So they should have done the right thing, which was gone a lot further.
This is amazing. I mean, I'm even seeing here like Jerome Adams. I'm seeing some others here on Twitter who are seeming to take the he's an MD, right? Seeming to take the position. Yeah, the Surgeon General. Seeming to take the position that the little tiny step that you've said that you've laid out here is somehow controversial. Is that so? Here's my feeling on this, Alex. The same way that I think there has been an oh my gosh, and that's one way of putting it, because I'm on radio, an oh my whatever bleep it moment, or a holy cow moment about the cover-up of Biden's dementia by what we consider the kind of establishment D.C. press corps, right? And, if you were AP, New York Times, go down the list, you just kind of went along with this whole thing and didn't care. CNN, the whole thing. And now they realize, wow, this is if we actually just go forward with this and everyone figures this out, or rather everyone knows this and we've admitted it, that could really hurt our long-term credibility. I wonder if some of these people in what I would consider institutional medicine, places like the CDC, not even medicine, kind of health policy, right? Places like the CDC, if they feel like their only choice is to dig in, because what happens to these places if everyone finally says, oh, wow, they were wrong about it and officially wrong about it?
Right. But here's, so again, like I knew there was going to be pushback just because there are people out there who just don't. I mean, a lot of people out there in the public health community who don't want to admit the truth, who aren't close to admitting the truth. And again, we're talking about policies that don't go nearly as far, the new policies, as the Europeans have been for 2 or 3 years. Okay, these are not radical policies. A radical policy would be these vaccines are getting pulled until we run a new trial with the situation as it is now, where everybody has had COVID already, where Omicron appears to be milder, and where we don't know the results of long-term repeated mRNA dosing. That's what I would do, okay? I would have done that for everybody, including people over 75. I would have said at this point, we have what's called clinical equipoise, where we just don't know if these things work at all, and that justifies a totally new clinical trial for everybody. Okay, they didn't do anything like that. And there are people who would have gone even further than that. So, let's basically take it all the way back to phase 1 for these and do the proper preclinical studies on animals that were, never done or were rushed back in 2020. Okay, they don't do any of that, and they don't get any credit for standing, sort of in the middle. So if I'm RFK, I don't expect anything different from public health. If I'm Vinay Prasad, who's the new top vaccine regulator at the FDA, and I know Vinay, and he's very smart, and he does not have a lot of confidence in the mRNAs, I would say. I mean, he may think that they're decent for older people, but he doesn't have blinders on about how well they work. Okay, they're just afraid of the pushback. And since they got all the pushback anyway, they might as well have done the right thing. And so that, again, I expect nothing from these public health people because we've seen how they've behaved for the last 5 years. But I would hope that the people we elected to fix this would push them a little bit harder.
Alex, also on the regulatory issues and when you look at Big Pharma and where RFK Jr. is going to play into this, and obviously, FDA, CDC, these different agencies all have some role or some say, I think, in the trajectory of some of the big health programs and health discovery projects that are out there. I thought this was really interesting. You pointed out on Twitter that the GLPs, which are amazing drugs, and you hear all these stories, are not just about people with weight loss, but also it helps with gambling addiction and helps with alcoholism. It's essentially it can curb the biochemistry in somebody that leads to overconsumption, which is a primary cause of most of our really bad diseases in this country. I mean, that's just the truth, right? I mean, the obesity epidemic and heart disease and all these things, it's all tied in. But that's an old drug that they did the right way, and that lately, are the pharma companies not doing the same kind of discovery and the same kinds of new drug, finding that we've hoped that they've been doing all along? I mean, where do you come down on that?
So yeah. I mean, this is something else I really want to write about. This is one of these, I want to write a book about, sort of addictive behaviors and drugs. I want to write. Write another John Wells novel. I want to write a book about this too, and I don't know that I will ever have time to, but it is an incredibly important issue. And that is, it's not that the companies, I think if you run a drug company, you hope to find good drugs, okay? You hope to find drugs that help people, that don't have terrible side effects, that, treat the condition that you're aiming at, okay? And in a perfect world, you hope that those are not too expensive. I mean, obviously the companies want to make money, but so in from about 1950 in 1960 through about 2000, what you would call the golden age of pharma and of small molecule drug discovery. These were simple chemicals. Okay, you put them. They were usually taken in pill form. They did things that were relatively straightforward. I'm going to reduce your blood pressure. I'm going to reduce your cholesterol. Sometimes it was a little more complicated. Like, I'm going to reduce, insulin predates that, but I'm going to help your pancreas work better and make more insulin. Okay. These are, they're complicated, but a reasonable person can understand how a drug like that works in a pretty straightforward way. And then the drugs would go off patent, and they were pills, right? And 1 million or 2 million or 5 million Americans would take them, and they cost a few dollars a day, so it's $1,000 a year. And if 3 million people take that, that's $3 billion a year. That's decent. That's good money. Okay, those drugs have all been found. they've all pretty much been found for the drugs that work the way I'm talking about. And in some ways, the GLPs are actually the last of these drugs, where it's a pretty straightforward receptor, and you just need to figure out how to activate it. And you can actually see the companies are trying to find drugs that won't be injectable, but will do the same thing that the injectable GLPs like Ozempic do. What they're stuck with now is far more complicated. They're stuck with autoimmune diseases. They're stuck with cancer. And those are really the big two. And those are smaller patient populations. They tend to be pretty sick. And the drugs are usually what are called biologics, which means they're actually grown oftentimes in mouse cells. And they have like a specific protein that interacts with with a complicated receptor that a small molecule just won't work on. So these are really complicated drugs. They're really expensive. The conditions they treat are really complicated, and they tend not to really work that well, or they have big side effects. So even there's a drug called Keytruda, which is now the biggest selling drug in the world. Merck sells $30 billion of it a year. Okay, it's an oncology drug. It's a drug for cancer. Does it work? Yes, it works. Okay, it will help people prolong life, but cancer is still incredibly lethal. Okay. And if you get a couple of extra years out of Keytruda, you're doing well. And that's a good thing. I wouldn't deny that to somebody. But this is a drug that costs $100,000 a year. And it is the best example of any of these drugs. So we have an industry now where all the easy stuff has been found. And guess what? The companies don't want to go away. They're big companies. They have lots of people working for them. They pay their executives a lot of money. So they're doing what they have to do, which is trying to find stuff for these really complicated conditions that's really expensive. But unfortunately, as a society, what it means is that we're paying now almost $500 billion a year, $500 billion for drugs that are pretty much marginally efficacious that only a few people are getting. If I showed you the list, and this is really the simplest way to look at this, if I showed you the list of the top selling drugs in 2004, you would know the names of those drugs. It's like Lipitor or Prozac.
Yeah.
You know what those drugs were, okay?
And those drugs work, by the way. I mean, Lipitor is really important for people who need it. But yeah.
That's right. The statins really work, okay? They work the best of, I think, of all the major big drug categories that we've invented in the last 50 years. But if you look now, unless you have like psoriasis, and those drugs are pretty heavily advertised, a lot of the drugs are psoriasis drugs, or you have cancer, psoriasis or other autoimmune diseases like arthritis. Unless you have one of those diseases, you've never heard of any of these drugs. And we as a society now are spending more and more on drugs that are for a tiny fraction of the population.
Well, a couple things, Alex, because we're going to run. I just want to ask you about this.
You got me going.
No. Look, I find this fascinating. I think the audience probably does too, because this really matters to all of us in our long-term health. But CRISPR technology, AI, do these things offer ways forward that can break what feels like this logjam? I mean, you're talking to something. I have celiac disease, and I actually used to follow a few companies that were doing trials on how to cure, because it's really annoying, and it actually creates a lot of like long-term challenges and problems for people, even if you do the gluten-free thing, because you can never do it perfectly. And anyway, and it's just total fail. Like every company has tried, every company so far has tried to do anything, like nothing, zero efficacy whatsoever. Does CRISPR technology, which is gene editing to modify DNA sequences, does that offer a breakthrough to the logjam?
I don't think so, and we'll see. I mean, I hope so. Okay, but we figured out the human genome over 20 years ago. Okay, and we are just at the beginning, after a massive investment, of getting drugs that are really or gene editing for the simplest of these diseases, which are essentially single, modifications, right? But to do this, a disease like schizophrenia or autism, these diseases that are very complicated and have genetic and environmental factors, like there's not one gene you can swap out and say everybody's better now. That's not how this works. And so AI is even more. It's like, well, we're going to make something that hits the receptor just right and doesn't have any off-target side effects. Wake me when it actually happens, because it has not happened yet.
Well, I think you got to write a book on this, Alex. Go check out Unreported Truths on Substack. And Alex, always appreciate you making the time for us.
Buck, thanks for having me. Sorry, you got me going.
No, it was good. I just we have to do a commercial. Got to pay the bills over here. Thank you so much. The Pure Talk team believes every service member who has faithfully served this country deserves to proudly fly an American flag, one that's made in America. And that's why Pure Talk is on a mission to give an allegiance flag, the highest quality American flag, to at least 1,000 veterans. You can participate too. Just switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk this month, and a portion of your monthly rate will go to provide these high-quality flags to veterans. With plans from just $25 a month for unlimited talk, text, and plenty of data, you can enjoy America's most dependable 5G network while cutting your cell phone bill in half. The average family saves over $1,000 a year. Just dial pound 250, say the keywords Clay and Buck, and Pure Talk's U.S. customer service team will get you switched hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. Again, dial pound 250, say Clay and Buck to support veterans, and switch to America's wireless company, Pure Talk.